Good morning and welcome to Easy Switchgear podcast. I've got one of my old colleagues and friends, Dion Wolfhard, here with me today. And in our series of interviewing very interesting people in our industry, it is my pleasure to host you today. Welcome, Dion.
Thanks, Evan. I really appreciate this opportunity. Yes, I hope we can get a few concrete answers out of the questions that we're going to discuss.
That's great. Dion, you drive a bike. What kind of a bike do you drive?
Now, Evan, it's a KLR 650 single cylinder and very reliable motorbike.
I heard it was used in the army.
Yeah, they use it in the US Marines for a combat motorcycle. And they do a lot of mods on it to make it a bit more robust. You know, because I like that cosmetic types of things on the plastics, the more industrial type of plastic. Very reliable motorbike and really enjoy it. Yeah, and mine is 14 years now without any troubles.
And it still looks beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's still in good condition.
Dion, you've been in the industry now many years and you originate at SABS. Which division did you work in at SABS?
ABB. Even I worked at South African Bureau of Standards for 11 years, from 1997, end of 1997 until 2012, roughly. Yeah.
That was the golden years, right?
Yeah, it was the good years. As we all know, with all the state-owned enterprises, things has changed dramatically. And it was a very, very, very good organization at that time. Very highly skilled people there. A lot of experience. So it was...
Your favorite person there was Uncle Speedy?
Yeah, John Speedy was a very, very, very good engineer. He actually worked at... he was a senior guy at Actum first, but he was the guy that impressed me the most, is that he started in his 20s in the UK and commissioning nuclear substations. So, yeah, he was a really... I mean, he worked 5 days a week, then 4 days a week, then 3 days, up to 1 day, and then hourly, and then as needed. So, yeah, he was brilliant. And hands-on. He doesn't say, you do that, you do that. He jumps in and he does the job, and very, very good. I've learned a lot from him. And then also Connie Jonker. He was the president of SANKI, South African National Commission of Illumination. So I worked for 1 year at the Lighting Technology Department also. Yeah.
Okay, great stuff. Yeah. And now you've been with ABB for many years?
14 years and 2 months.
And retiring now?
Scaling down.
Scaling down. And then what was something incredible that you learned from your time in ABB?
Let me explain to you. At South African Bureau of Standards, a lot of technical, because remember I ended up at NETFA, the National Electrical Testing Facility, for a start. So and then I've been there for about 8 to 9 years. There I've done about more than 250 tests, internal arc tests on LVs, panels, temperaturized tests on LV panels, braking capacities, you know, on the breakers, or the worst case scenarios, biggest breakers in smallest compartment type of thing, on CTs on their own, you know, outdoor CTs, block type CTs, any type of CT, we do short time withstands on those things, impulse tests. So it was quite really a very, very, very interesting time in my life.
A lot of knowledge.
Yeah, a lot of knowledge I picked up there. There was engineers coming there from consultants, and they were surprised.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, you know, you think you know everything until you come here. Because remember, in the whole industry, you try to prevent faults. There we generated...
We want to keep the smoke inside, as they say.
So we've done a lot of... and one of the companies, or two of the companies that was actually testing the most there was ABB at that time. When they developed locally the unit, and then also Actum was quite active. Yeah.
And then obviously you moved on and later you joined ABB.
Yeah, and from there I actually was a little bit at consultants, you know, a little bit on networks and stuff like that. And then I went to ABB in 2010, and I've been there now for 14 years. What I've learned a lot at ABB that was actually very beneficial for me is people skills. Definitely. You think you've got people skills until you go there, and then
when you have to test switchgear, you don't have to have a lot of people skills.
Yeah.
And you ended up in sales. How was that process for you?
Well, to give you a surprise, when I applied for the job there, I didn't even know what I applied for. Because when I phoned the guy, he said to me, they got 2 positions here and 1 in Durban, and I applied for it, and they phoned me within 3 days, and we had an interview, and they appointed me, but I didn't even know what job it was.
Great stuff.
So when I started there, it says to me, when they interviewed me on the HR side, they say, okay, they didn't say actually it's a sales job. Say, what will you do if you go to a customer and this happens? What will if a customer reacts like this, what will you do? Yeah, so, and then at some stage I realized, okay, this is now a sales job. And it's not easy. It wasn't easy. Yeah. It wasn't really easy.
You learned a lot about sales, eh?
A lot about sales, how customers think, and one thing that you can't learn at a university or in any book is to read body language and to get a feel of the customer.
I think that's one of the biggest shortcomings in universities today is the soft skills are not developed as the critical skills, Yes. So when a young engineer come out of university, a lot of the time they're very ill-equipped for all the human interaction that they are going to have to do, and speaking with technical people, speaking with non-technical people, even worse.
Correct.
And handling the interpersonal conflict that happens in workplaces.
Correct.
So that's very interesting that you say that. Now you've been in the medium voltage network space now for 14 years.
Yes.
And you've seen some of the bigger customers. You've worked with the mines a lot. How is the mindset currently in South Africa towards the electrical infrastructure in terms of maintenance and those kind of things?
Okay, first of all, what I've picked up recently with the tough economical situation in South Africa, well, globally there's also challenges, but what I've picked up now at the mines, they prioritize maintenance before replacement. So they will maintain up till the point where they say, okay, now we don't have leverage anymore. We need to replace. So replacement became a very small part now in terms of, in the time when I started at 2010, they rather replace before they do maintenance.
Yeah.
Or fixing or whatever you want to call it.
Something tripped twice, throw it away, put a new one.
Yeah. Because capital was plenty. There was more than enough, and the economy and the demand, was quite high. So it wasn't a problem at the time, but now I realize that it's a problem, and also there's a skills problem. Because remember, most of the persons, engineers and junior engineers, whatever you want to call them, they're moving out. So most of them are 55 and upwards, the experienced guys, and there's very, very little few of companies that understands the thing of transfer knowledge. Mentoring and transfer knowledge, And I think that is the biggest challenge. So the guy that takes over, he's there, but he struggles and he battles a bit and so on. So it's quite a challenge.
I found a lot of consulting companies, maybe I can't make a generalization about it, but it's almost like they use old designs of previous engineers and just making it sort of work for the new situations. There's very few engineers nowadays that can really design and actually select and know why they select. And not over-select, because they sometimes fall over to the side where they want to create this bulletproof system costing 5-6 times more than what it's supposed to be. So it's interesting that the market knowledge and skill set is quite different from...
It's not like in the olden days where the guy done everything from basic principles, And the documentation that they set up is totally... Those guys were still kind of proud what they do. They want to leave a legacy behind. Yes, There's documentate that file. Because when I was working at South African Bureau of Standards, we test... Transformer testing is not a joke. It's really quite complicated. So what happened is, my senior didn't have a driver's license because he stayed in the UK all the years.
Yes.
So we need to go to the factories. Before you start the testing, you need to go to the factory and do all the pre-testing there, and then come back.
Yeah, you don't want to waste the time.
Yeah, so he can't drive, so I must drive. Right. So then I realized I've got a big problem here. So I took Hans Fourie. He worked about 45 years at SAPS. Very, very knowledgeable guy on transformers. So I took him with. I went together with him, and he guided me and so on. And then when we get to the testing point, it's really a challenge when you set up that plant to do the test correctly. It's not a joke. It's really a serious thing.
Which test site that you were involved with is still operating today?
Well, Netfa is still operating, but I won't say they...
a private one.
A private testing authorities Locally, on small components like luminaires, you get guys, I think Test Africa at the CSR premises, and you get on globally side, I mean, if you're talking about switchgear, then it's like a Kema in the Netherlands. You know,
but there's
locally,
very little left.
Local private testing, very little. Because remember, you can't copy or duplicate a Netfa.
No.
It's impossible actually. Just to give you an idea, I think it would cost about 50 billion to do a plant like that.
Yeah. And one of the things that the government should do is have these things in place so that companies like ourselves that want to develop and grow and develop products, yes, that we actually have facilities to go.
It's a valuable asset, but it's actually a pity that it's not utilized effectively.
Yeah. Can you imagine if South Africa would have more facilities like this at a more affordable price, something that the government can actually subsidize, exactly, that we can do more development in South Africa of products? That would be great for our country.
Very, very, very. Yeah. It's a really it's a bit sad on one side, but sad that it's neglectable that the government doesn't see the asset and they can't, because it's very, very handy, as you say, to do type testing. It's very, very handy. And also the effectiveness of the Bureau of Standards is not the same than it was in our time. And the benefits of it, we had at that time, there was a guy there, Inspector Herman, I remember Herman Spitz, a short little guy. So he goes into Checkers and Pick n Pay, and he take a packet, look at it and say, oh, okay, doesn't comply to the marking, doesn't comply to this, doesn't comply. Calls the big boss in Checkers, whatever brand, he says, listen, and he's got authority. So he takes all that products off the shelf immediately. It's not like, okay, I'll send you a letter first and this. He takes it off there. And then he says, I'm going now back to the Bureau of Standards, we're going to test this thing and give you a test report. So there was quite control in terms of protecting the consumer.
But I can imagine today there's a lot of slip-throughs, right?
A lot of slip-throughs, briberies type of things. Yeah. And I'll give you 10,000 rand, can you help me with test report, those type of things. So
it is very sad that something like Netfa is not in tip-top condition and affordable to business in South Africa. Yeah. It's almost like government is taking money that's supposed to develop South Africa and just giving it as grants.
Correct.
Imagine how it could benefit business if these kind of places are working properly.
Yeah, effectively.
Yes.
The problem is also at that time, what I experienced when I was there in 2008 roughly, is customers already complained about pricing. See, because the overheads are very high. And then the pricing is really, the testing prices was already, they complained already at that time. So I can imagine in these days what it will cost.
Yeah. So if we look at the SpaceX model of Elon Musk, they built something as quick as possible and test it. Yeah. Boom. Okay, wait, it blew up. Where did it blow up? How can we fix that? And then it's an iterative process. But if you have to pay so much money to a big company or a big place like Netfa, which is not subsidized at all, then it takes away that impetus of doing tests and iterative building process. So now you go heavy design based. You design everything and you basically over-engineer it so that it please do not fail at that stage, because it's so expensive. And that it takes away of a lot of businesses, a lot of our size businesses cannot do it.
Yes.
Whereas only the big guys can do it, and they also don't want to really do it. They've got their product that works. And who wants to design new products when it costs that much? It takes away a lot of that growth that can come to an economy.
Correct.
Yeah. So in terms of the medium voltage network, and you've been selling now for many years, municipalities, they still have weird specs, right?
Yeah, even what I've picked up at, Tshwane for instance, we had a power failure and I went with the DA councillor to the substation that was actually providing that area, and they opened the door, and when I looked at the switchgear, I said to the guy, sure, I think it's time that the guys need to budget to replace these things. He said, no, it's very good switchgear. I said, yeah, AG16. He said, yeah. I said, okay. And if it breaks, do you have spares? No, you can't get any spares anymore. I said, okay. So what they do is they take a problem and just extend it.
Yes.
So at some stage, there's no way they're gonna, they take from panels, non-critical panels, and they move the parts around and fix it. Otherwise,
so you cannibalize your network to fix smaller and smaller amount.
And what makes me actually a bit annoyed is once you see in Pretoria a lot of substations that blow up in the recent years, and you see big fires and stuff like that is due to the oil insulated still that they're using.
Are they still using oil insulated?
Those AG16s is still oil insulated.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that's the problem why it makes such a hell of a big fires, and flames and stuff, is due to the oil that's burning. Because air insulated switchgear, it will burn, but it won't definitely.
It will be a very localized arc-based burn.
And if you have the right switchgear like Siemens ABB is now, that it will be contained anyway.
Of course.
And the breaker will trip. And
because those were big fires. They lost the whole
substation down for months. 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks type of thing. So the problem is in the councils is that they're using consultants now. So that's also taking the cost of projects. Push it up very high because there's.
But they used to have their own internal
engineers. I had a friend that was studying with me at Technikon, and he was working there for 21 years. Very clued up. I mean, he's done his T5 diploma, master diploma in electrical engineering, and he worked a long time for I can't remember, Royal Haskoning.
Yes, THV,
and now he's on a company that's doing big solar projects. For them. So he's got a lot of experience, but he also at some stage he said he can't stay at the council. There's a lot of things that's changing, and
the work situation.
He doesn't want to adapt to that, so he left. So they had a lot of skills inside. So it was a bit more cost effective to do a project because you keep your cost contained in terms of that. But now when you get consultants, they're 3 times a month. That becomes a challenge.
And also the whole consulting model is weird because a consultant get a percentage of the project size.
Correct.
So it's like an incentive to blow up the project. Which is not always the case, but I can imagine that mentality being there to oversize a project and using any trick in the book to devaluate and lower the rating so you can get a bigger thing. Whereas prudence would have been a little bit different than that.
But just to add on to this, for instance, at the mine at Palabora, I can give you an example. If you got skilled people, there's a guy at Palabora Copper that I dealt now for many years now. And if they come and they say, we want to buy Russian switchgear and all these type of things that he's not familiar with, he says, you're welcome to take over the project and you can handle it. I'm not getting involved in anything. And also afterwards, no maintaining, I'm not involved, thank you. He knows ABB. Because they have a lot of substations, a lot of that still needs to be replaced, very old switchgear. But the problem is one day, 3 guys got burned.
Yes.
But luckily not very serious, but not third degree, I think it's 2nd degree, that's a little bit less. They end up in Milpark Hospital, all 3 of them. And then management just say, okay, we'll write a check. So he realizes what is the importance of good switchgear.
Of course.
It's maybe you spend a little bit, but to have quality.
I've seen in the market people, especially with older switchgear, it's like, oh, those things have been working forever. They will just keep working. When have you maintained it? No, we've maintained it 5 years ago and it's just still working fine. How do you know? How can you be sure by the next time it will actually still work? And like the discussion we had just before the session is about the one where the door was actually rusted in the closed position that he cannot open it. He had to bang it with some hammer or something just to open the door. Can you imagine the maintenance schedule of that place? Bjorn, so what is the technological advancement in the switchgear space at the moment?
Okay, first of all, on advancements in ABB, for instance, and I think other companies also starting now developing and so on, but in the forefront, ABB is kind of in front leading in terms of development, R&D, in terms of to eliminate CTs and VTs, bringing in the sensor technology.
Yes, Rogowski coils and sensors.
Yes, Rogowski coils and the sensor and the voltage sensor. So what the benefit of that is, you save a lot of weight on your total board. Downtime is very little when you need
you can swap out very quickly.
Yeah, it takes about, to change a Rogowski coil will take about 10 minutes. Where a VT will take you, or a CT will take you quite like a day or a day and a half.
Yes. Because
remember, some of them go around, they go around the bus bars.
You have to strip out
a lot of stripping. Yeah. Where the Rogowski coil goes over the spout with 2 little screws.
And you don't have to
optic
retest
fiber wire.
everything again. You just retest your protection, and then you're done.
Yeah, and actually what you do is it's got like a value on the Rogowski coil, and you type it in the relay, and it does the calculations. That's it.
And the relay tests the Rogowski coil constantly, so you will know before.
Yes. Check the optic fiber connection, and it will give you an alarm or some alert to say there's a connection error. So in that term, it's quite good, and also the downtime, and also you can keep stock in your office because it weighs about 350 to 400 grams for a Rogowski coil, and ABB is designing two ranges, so one 0 amps till 2500 amp. One range. For 2500 amp, you until 4000 you use another one. So
but you know why? It's only because the coil needs to be a little bit bigger for the bus bar to pass.
But they also got clever now. They're also making split units now.
Oh, really? And a flexible one? Not yet.
Not flexible at this moment.
Oh, okay. Very interesting.
So that's the one advancement, and then also in the I'm not too clued up in the protection side, but also on the protection side, they also do a lot of advancements in terms of to simplify the amount of relays available, because remember they had a wide range, and then it becomes an issue. So now they had one for a feeder, one for an incomer, REF and RED, all these types, for differential protection. Now they make it a REX. So REX can do diff,
you slot in whatever you need.
And if a card fails, give a problem, you take the card out, phone them. Normally they keep
it makes it easier of keeping stock, because you only have to keep a few cards, not full relays.
That's good. Yeah. So that was a very, very good move in that direction to make it simplified, because one thing I like is simplification. I mean, you can make things a lot of complicated, but I mean that was a very good move. So it's actually the REX range 615, 640, which is the master one, touchscreen type of thing. So it's about 2 or 3 relays in the whole to cover the whole M unit, and then after that going to 670, which is now the transmission type of stuff. But on the MV side, it's about 3 relays, 615. I think you get a 610, 615, and a 640. The 620 I think is not even available anymore. I think it's 3 relays.
What advice will you give to new engineers graduating this year or last year?
From university?
Yes.
My biggest advice to any engineer when he comes out of university, don't sit behind a computer. Get an overall on your body and start with spanners.
Yeah.
And make mistakes.
Get experience.
Yeah. Make mistakes, ask questions. If you don't make mistakes, you're also not going to learn.
One of the things that I did in university was to do vacation work, back work. Every holiday that I could take a chance to get away, every time when there was 2 or 3 weeks of holiday, I would go and do vacation work. It taught me a lot about the industry. It taught me a lot about, like I said, the working relationships and what to expect, as well as you have your, you become accustomed to the hours and the business and how it works and the strictness of business.
You get a feel of the house.
Because as a young student, you can have your hair however, your clothes doesn't matter. But when you're in the workplace, there's a certain work ethic, there's a certain way of looking, there's a certain way of communicating, and that is worthwhile to learn before you even graduate.
So what I picked up one time, I've been at the smelter on the way to Meyerton. It was, I think it was Manco. And I was looking for a certain person, and then they said, no, this person is on leave. And then I looked in, and it was like a containerized office. So I started speaking to this guy, and he was sitting behind a computer. I said, listen, my friend, how long have you been working here? He says, 2 years, maybe, or 1 year. He says, where have you been? No, at university. I said, okay. I said, but which guy in here got the most experience? He says, that guy, 26 years. I said, my friend, then you take on the overall, take a spanner, go with that guy to the plant, because here behind the computer, you're not going to learn anything.
No.
He actually...
Did he listen to you?
He listened to me. And I think that night he was thinking of what I'm saying to him. So anyway, you're going to learn.
Yeah,
so anyway.
That's true. Now, 2025 has just begun. 2025 has just begun, and if you look in your crystal ball, what's in the year for us?
For 2025, in terms of economy-wise, it's the make or break year, definitely for South Africa. In terms of the GNU, there's strong people in good positions. You know, so and also with the American president that is also elected now, it's going to be a challenging year to see what is South African government's attitude against the Western world, like against America and stuff. Because remember, we got that AGOA agreement,
which come up for renewal.
Yes, for renewal, and 75% of our agricultural products is part of that for export.
Are we exporting that much to USA?
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. That's why you can't afford to lose that. If we lose that, we've got a serious problem in our agriculture sector. So I think it's going to be a positive year with a lot of challenges still and to streamline stuff, but this will be the make or break year. I think the honeymoon is now, after 100 days, the honeymoon is over now, it's now seriousness. So I think we'll start seeing the effect of the work that is being done. And in big departments like the Department of Public Works, that guy is quite competent, he's quite serious what he's doing. And then also in the Department of Internal Affairs, the IDs and the passports and stuff like that. There's a lot of positive things also. That guy's very competent also. And then in the agriculture sector, it's John Steenhuisen, which is brilliant. So I think, you know that the agricultural sector is quite like about 26% of GDP.
Yeah, it's a bedrock of our.
Yeah, it's a serious.
If it grows, it will benefit a lot of.
So it's not too serious if you've got in some departments not the top performer there. It can be, you know, handled with, but the important stuff that I mentioned, you know, is quite important that you've got the right guy there. There's still a few hiccups here and there, but yeah, I think this year will determine where we will go and how serious they are. It's just some of the policies they need to really, you know, and what makes me a bit annoyed is that we got a lot of clever people and experienced people in South Africa. So they must just listen when these people talk and try and do what they say, and you will make your life much easier. But in terms of challenging, in terms of ArcelorMittal, for instance, now with their long steel plants that's going to close down, it's not that they want to do it, it's that they're at a point now that they can't be sustainable anymore. And the problem is in South Africa is due to the, as you said with Netfa, the subsidizing of
critical infrastructure.
Yes. That is becoming a challenge now, because remember, that's why they say the South African farmers are the best in the world, because they can produce at a profit and they can export and create food security for South Africa with no subsidization.
Yeah.
They have to compete with America, Europe, all those guys get subsidization. Yeah. So they're very, 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 very clued up. I've got a lot of respect for them. But that is the biggest challenge also in terms of on the government side, that they don't subsidize important infrastructure, as you say, which is critical for the government. But I think it's going to be a make or break year, and I'm positive still, definitely. There's good things happening in certain parts and sectors and so on. It's still, you know, a lot of other things that needs to improve. Due to the elections coming 2026, I think municipal elections, that will definitely also be an interesting time. And people are realizing also now, you know, that I'm paying tax, I'm driving through 200 potholes and it is not working. So they realize, okay, we need to think when we go to the voting box.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I think it's going to be a good year, definitely. I think last year was a tough year.
Yes,
it
last year was quite an
It
interesting.
was, I mean, even for ABB, they struggled, and it's not a joke. But I think, and remember, it's also about supply and demand.
Of course.
So look at Anglo Platinum, what happened there?
Price went down.
Totally down. So things change overnight.
Yes.
Today, copper price is fine, tomorrow it's down. You know, it's so it's a very volatile type of market.
Of course.
But that's why you need to be, you know, like don't have your diversified and don't have your exit fund basket.
Yeah. Thanks, Dion. It was very nice to speak to you, and thank you for all the listeners being here today.
Thanks, Evan, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.